how to access your Yoroi Shelly testnet wallet and delegate from the mobile version. Start by logging in to your Yoroi wallet. We are going to go through the process of restoring a Shelly testnet wallet. Enter in your recovery phrase when prompted. Remember, no one will ask for your recovery phrase for any purpose. It is up to you to keep this phrase safe. After entering the recovery phrase, we have to set a wallet name, which can be anything, and a spending password. After pressing the confirm button, you will be asked to verify the restored wallet. Press confirm. Next, it will ask if you want to check for a wallet upgrade. If you have upgraded your wallet before successfully, please press skip. Recently, the Yoroi team has been putting out fixes for people who have had trouble upgrading their wallet. If you had issues before, please press check to upgrade your wallet. If you are still having problems, please contact the Emergo help desk at this link. In my case, we will be pressing skip as we have already upgraded this particular wallet. Once this is done, we should be at the delegation dashboard. I'm currently already delegating to a pool, so there is listed data from before, such as total rewards, total ADA delegated, epoch number, and the current epoch progress. We are going to redelegate this wallet's ADA by pressing Staking Center. From the Staking Center, we can search or filter our results. I'm going to choose this pool and delegate to it, so I press Delegate, and from here, it asks for a spending password that we had set before. After pressing Delegate, the changes aren't immediately displayed as this takes some time to update. Fast forwarding time, we can now see that from my dashboard, I am now delegating to the stake pool I have specified. That's all there is to it. You should now be staking ADA in the Shelly testnet. Remember, if you have any problems, please contact us at our support desk. The link for that will be included in this video's description.
Hi, everybody. This is Charles Hoskinson broadcasting live from warm, sunny, corona-filled Colorado. It is March 9th, and I just returned yesterday from London after our wonderful PwC workshop. And we've all been greeted by the prospects of a global depression coming, or the potential thereof. And so I figured I'd make a movie to kind of, a video to kind of dissect a little bit of what this means for our industry as a whole. You know, it's easy when there's blood in the streets and panic to panic yourselves and say, well, oh God, does this mean everything's coming to an end? But really, what we are looking at right now is the unraveling of the economic order of the 20th century. You know, the reality is that we built a global economy through a series of treaties, agreements, wars, winners and losers that had certain assumptions about how power should work, how money should work, how credit should work, how finance should work, how information needs to flow. And this economy was sustainable and stable when information was not instantaneous and when it was totally acceptable to have empires, meaning one or two nation states being supreme above all others and establishing all the rules and regulations. Furthermore, this economy had no ability to deal with rapid social change and no ability to deal with rapid technological change. And what's happened is every single time we've seen rapid social change and rapid technological change, the banking system of the 20th century said, oh, well, we'll just solve the problem with cheap credit. We'll print lots of money. We'll go ahead and just keep this unlimited credit culture, and we'll live in a world of increasing debt. For example, right at the turn of the 20th to the 21st century, the national debt of the United States was about $4.5 trillion, with a surplus. At the beginning of 2020, the national debt was well beyond $20 trillion, with no end in sight. a five-fold increase in less than 20 years, which is a truly remarkable thing. And that was just on the US side. And everybody was always living for something to come to save us. Japan, for example, the Olympics, it'll come and save us. And then what do we see? We see a global pandemic come and tourism will not occur. What does it mean? The boom that Japan is looking for 2020 won't happen. And they will continue to watch their debt to GDP get worse and worse, and they're going to continue to watch their economy stagnate. The same for China, the same for South Korea. We look at Italy. 16 million people are potentially going to be under quarantine. Do you think that at the end of all of that, that those people are going to wake up and say, we love our government, we trust it? No, they're probably going to put a populist government in, and we'll probably see an Italian version of Brexit come. And can the European Union survive if Italy leaves? Perhaps France next? Maybe, maybe not. All of this, the markets, the world order, you are seeing a lack of fundamental integrity. People do not have faith that the institutions we have can protect us and allow us to address the problems of the 21st century. We are all aware that strong AI has the potential in this century to end humanity. Nothing is being done about it. For the last 10 years, epidemiologists have been saying time and again that a global pandemic could kill 200 million people and collapse the global economy. It was one of the least and last priorities of the world order. And now we are facing potentially this prospect. Where are they? We can't even agree on basic things like who to test, how to test, when to test, or coordinating relief efforts. So there's a global skepticism that the institutions we have are not going to succeed in the 21st century. So what is the point of our industry? Our industry, the cryptocurrency industry, has nothing to do with fast returns or dealing with volatility or the price of Bitcoin. It has everything to do with a global conversation about changing the way we do things, not just in institutions, whether we should put power in one or the other, about removing the need overall from institutions. We no longer need central authority. We no longer need presidents, kings, governors, leaders, CEOs to get things done. This whole movement is about trust and consent and immutable rules that don't care about the daily news, don't care if there's a plague, don't care if there's a problem or a war or an earthquake. They behave the same way, just like the laws of physics behave. Much safer for us to build things on. And the whole point is these systems are Darwinian and effective only when they've been put under pressure, which is exactly what's happening today. You see, there's going to be many winners and losers in our industry. There's over 3,000 cryptocurrencies. But all of us collectively in this industry know one thing, that over the next 5 years, whoever wins will be a significantly more competitive, better product that does more for everyone, has more utility for everyone than all the other ones who lose. This is not the case with the money system of the 20th century. This is not the case for the social systems of the 20th century. There are so many that were created that are suboptimal, predatory, highly centralized, highly unfair, ripe with inequality and a lack of inclusiveness, but exist because of either random chance or that, well, somebody got lucky. Our industry is the polar opposite. Everything we do, every action we take, every innovation we make is accessible to everyone. And to compete with each other, we mutually must adopt concepts like private computation, useful proof of work, inclusive accountability, high throughput proof of stake. All of these amazing innovations on the layer 2 side, they're all open source. The ones that matter and the ones that don't will die. And within 5 years, these systems will be globally available to billions of people, built into consumer products, cell phones, operating systems, into the browser. The fastest growing browser right now is one that's built on the foundations of a cryptocurrency, Brave. And we can wake up within 5 years and see more usage for that than Google Chrome has. The fastest growing social systems we have are on the cryptocurrency side. And the other thing is, this is where you are in control. You own your own bank. Should a global pandemic upend and push us into a depression, do you think people are going to want to live in a financial system where their bank accounts can be shut down at any time, where they're told that there are limits on how much money they can withdraw every single day, where they can send money, who they can send money to? Do you think that they're going to accept systems like that? Systems that exist to preserve the power of the few? Or do you think they want to live in a world where the value that they have can be moved anywhere, anytime to anyone, and they can take it with them? The same for their identity and their privacy. Our institutions have and continue to fail us. And this market correction is just another example of the market saying that explicitly and outright. In my own country, the United States of America, the response could have been bipartisan and simple. Our president and the opposition party could have set their petty rivalries aside and said, it's for the good of our people, we should work together. Instead, what did they do? They looked at it like a game of political football. And they said, hey, let's go ahead and see who can score the most points. A recession is bad for the incumbent president, so let's just make sure that that happens regardless. And meanwhile, the other side is ignoring the fact that we are entering into a pandemic and millions of people could die because they don't want the markets to collapse. It's disgusting. And it just shows you the lack of integrity the system has as a whole. And the end result will not be one side winning or the other side winning. It will be that the system has to be replaced with a better system. So my plea to everybody in our industry is to calm down and relax and do not succumb to fear, but understand that we are standing at the arc of history at the moment, and understand that we as an industry are collectively, despite our differences, working on the same problem. The problem of how do we build a society without kings or presidents or leaders, a problem of how do we build a society that gets rid of the middlemen, a problem of how do we build a society that is as fair for the least amongst us as it is for the most amongst us. This is the reason we're all here. This is the reason why we have resilience and durability. The markets are panicking that they collapse 10% here, 20% here. We in the crypto space have seen collapses of 90%. Yet we still show up for work every single day. We still fight hard every single day. And we still remember who we are and why we signed up. And today I'm just as passionate as I was when Bitcoin was worthless. And tomorrow I will be, and the day afterwards, and we will find a way to win. So as tragic as these things can be, and the fact that we are entering hard times and the economy is looking perilous, always remember that there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and that we will reach a point where things change. The nature of identity, the nature of property, the way you vote, the way you give consent, how you hold your wealth and how you transform your wealth, the rewards you get from the merits you have, the people you have relationships with, trust, the movement of medical data, all of these things in the next 25 years will change to a new form that is fair for everybody. This is the reason we're here. This is why I'm here. This is why my company exists. This is why Cardano exists. And frankly, this is why EOS exists and Tezos exists and Bitcoin exists and all these other things. We disagree about conduct. We disagree about particular ways of executing and how these protocols need to be structured. But not for a moment do I doubt that my competitors and this industry as a whole is philosophically aligned about killing the middleman and building a better world for everybody. So hang in there. Don't succumb to fear and panic, and realize that the fundamentals of our industry are far more sound than the fundamentals of the legacy system we intend on replacing. And as bad as things can be, they could be worse. We could emerge from all of this no wiser, no more capable, and still chained to the old sins of the past. Thank you so much for listening, and hang in there. Cheers.
So happy International Women's Day. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my experience in the industry so far. I have to say women have come a long way in the STEM disciplines as well. That STEM means science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And yeah, we do have a long way to go. I look around and there aren't as many women as there should be, but for the Cardano Foundation, for example, we're an entity that really empowers women. We want to hire more women, and women have an opportunity at any level to join us. Same with all of our other technology partners. We're also able to now train women in blockchain technology, as we've done in Ethiopia. We trained over 21 women. We had over 300 applications, and we trained over 21 women in Haskell development. And these women now have the skills to build whatever they want. They can essentially just build their own future. So we can focus on the negative and say there aren't enough women, but I really truly think that we're here. We're making a difference. It's very apparent all over the world. And it's important for men, too, to help raise us up as well and support us any way they can. So women helping other women is key. Men helping women is key. We all have to help each other and empower each other to be better. We have to share our stories. The more female leaders we see out there, the more women are going to be inspired. People like Marissa Myers. It's so great to see women in technology succeed. And it's really exciting to see a lot of really smart women, specifically in blockchain, come to positions of power and actually lead from the top. So technology used to be a very male-driven sort of discipline. But because blockchain represents so many different facets, it's so diverse, embedded within it is the almost mandate to have female voices and women's voices heard and women's contributions to the advancement of the technology. It's baked right into the DNA of blockchain technology.
All right, everyone, welcome back to Masari's Unqualified Opinions. I'm Ryan Selkis at 2-Bit Idiots. I have another great guest today. Do you know who it is? It's Charles Hoskinson, the founder of Cardano, CEO of IOHK, a crypto development firm. We're going to talk about all things Cardano. As you could probably glean from the onset in my intro, we'll have a little bit of fun with crypto Twitter and some of the branding around Cardano, any misconceptions that there might be, generally where the project has evolved over the course of the last couple of years. Some of the recent milestones, including a recent hard fork that switched the protocol to proof of stake, and so much more. But before we get into all that, Charles, thank you for joining us. I always like to start, even though it's a little bit cliche, to get a sense for how our guests came down the crypto rabbit hole and became, basically in a very short amount of time, the leaders of this emerging ecosystem. So what was your journey before crypto and to crypto that ultimately led to Cardano following your co-founding of Ethereum?
Well, first, Ryan, thank you so much for having me on. I think this is long overdue. We've been trying to do this for quite some time. Now, your question is, how did I get started? As with many of the people in the space, it was quite serpentine. So I started studying mathematics, and at the same time, I was kind of a political firebrand. I was part of the Ron Paul movement. So I read about Austrian economics and gold-backed money and these types of things. So I always had this passion for monetary policy and this passion for fintech. And right around 2011, I read the Bitcoin white paper as actually part of the Slashdot revolution, where a whole bunch of people heard about Bitcoin for the first time, and I said, "Oh, that's kind of novel and interesting, but it doesn't really look like it's going to work." It's one of those things where you need momentum, and if you have momentum, then it's self-sustaining. But there was never an event to really kind of push it into that overdrive. So I mined some, I bought some, I actually accumulated quite a bit of Bitcoin because it was so cheap, but I didn't really care about it. I kind of let it go. The sea change for me was 2013 when I realized that venture capital money had come in and that it had gotten that momentum that was required for sustainability. And that was also the first time that Bitcoin hit $1 billion by market cap. And so as a consequence, Bitcoin really had grown to a point where I felt that it was worthy of full-time attention. So I quit my job. I went all in, and I asked an old professor of mine for some advice of what should I do. And he said, "Well, those who cannot do, teach." I said, that's good. So I should teach. So I learned a lot. I learned a lot about Bitcoin, and then I created a free course on Udemy, and it's actually still up. called Bitcoin, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love Crypto. And basically that course was a Creative Commons license introduction to a lot of the concepts, everything from public key crypto to how mining works, et cetera, et cetera. And I ended up getting about 80,000 students from that course. And I got over 5,000 emails over the life of the course. And I answered all of them. And it was a great way to just kind of meet everybody. I met Adam Levine, I met Andreas Antonopoulos, I met Roger Ver, Eric Voorhees. And back then, nobody was really that cool. And it was very easy to talk to people. You just email them. Now everybody's kind of gotten a bit bigger, so it's a little harder to schedule meetings. But on the back of that, one of my students was actually a venture capitalist in China. His name was Li Xiaolao, and he ran something called Bitfund. And he said, hey, I'd like the cut of your jib. I just want to give you some money to start something. And I was like, I'm the worst person in the world to give money to. I've never run a real business, I've never done project management or product management. I'm not really an entrepreneur. And he said, no, you have what it takes. Here's $500,000, go figure something out. So I said, okay, I should probably go do something. So I asked my students, where should I go? What should I do? And I got a bimodal distribution of answers. One cluster said you should do a stable coin because volatility is bad. And another cluster said you should do a decentralized exchange because exchanges fail. And I said, those are both really good ideas. Is there any way we can kind of combine both of those ideas together into one product? And so I created a forum thread on Bitcoin Talk, and it was called Project Invictus. I think it's still floating around those forums. And the very first person to reply to that, ironically, was Dan Larimer. So Dan's like, hey, I got this thing called BitShares that I've been thinking about. I'm right now working at a company in Blacksburg. I tell you what, if we partner, I'll quit my job, and you be the CEO, I'd be the CTO. I said, all right, let's talk about it. So Dan and I ended up actually working together for a while. We started a company called Invictus Innovations, and we didn't really get along too much. And I'd only been there for a few months. So I said, screw it. I'll take a buyout and figure something else out. I'm 0-1. So right around the same time, I was working with Anthony Diorio, and I was doing some educational content for the Bitcoin Alliance of Canada. And, it was so funny. We were having a call in October of 2013, and he mentioned, hey, side thing, really small thing. There's this really smart kid that keeps coming to my meetup groups who's got this weird white paper called Ethereum. And it's really raw. I just read it and I can't make heads or tails of it. Can you let me know what you think? And I said, all right, Anthony, I'll do it. So I printed out the white paper. I put it on my desk, and I got around to it about a week later. I read the paper. I called up Anthony. I said, it needs a lot of work, but things look pretty interesting. What do you want to do with it? He said, well, why don't you join these meetings that we're having? There's like 4 of us. Let's just figure it out. So that was Amir Shatrit, Mihai, Alicia, Vitalik, and Anthony. So I went and did that. And then, of course, it snowballed into Ethereum. I was there for about 6 months and helped them get started and helped set up the ICO. And then moved on when we had the big schism over whether we should be a for-profit like Ripple or a not-for-profit. And then I kind of went into the hinterlands for a bit, and I said, "Oh well, I'm 0-2. I'm really bad at this. I should just go back and into mathematics and stop being an entrepreneur." But actually,
but before we go, I mean, you're skipping over like a major part of the evolutionary story. I think that there's a temptation, because there were so many smart people involved that had wildly different theories for how Ethereum should be built and ultimately rolled out, that if you asked a couple of years ago, maybe emotions would run too high to get sober answers or any type of historical perspective. But I'm curious, at least from your standpoint, without naming names, if you'd be able to break down, or you can name names if you want to, but I don't want to put you on the spot. But if you could just break down the different camps, at least, that were involved early on as part of the pre-sale and then as part of the initial rollout, because it's such an important creation event in the industry, right? The creation of Ethereum did create a Cambrian explosion of other smart contract platforms, all with the same, or generally I'd say the same end goal, but that took very, very different, made different design choices and took very different paths to actually get there. Can you break down the interpersonal and the strategic differences that led to some of the really good stuff in the launch, but then also some of the defections?
It's funny, Ryan. Yeah, the most significant work of my career has been at IOHK, and we've written almost 60 academic papers, 1 million lines of code. We've launched a product market that's a top 10 cryptocurrency. And I've been there for 5 years. I was at Ethereum for 6 months, but everybody just wants to talk about Ethereum. But briefly, there are three.
Let me.
I'll answer.
Go ahead. Yep.
So there are 3 books actually coming out this year on the founding and history of Ethereum, and all of them actually I think 2 of them have been optioned for movies. So it's a very well told story. But succinctly, there were 3 things that led to where Ethereum was at. One, it was an open source project that realized it was going to get a lot of money very quickly. And the problem there was that it didn't found with proper controls, governance, legal agreements, and a common understanding of what everybody was going to do and everybody's relationship to each other. So when I first joined, there was 5 people. I was the 5th person. Within 2 months, we had over 100 people floating around the project. And everybody was kind of horizontal. So it wasn't clear who's in charge. It wasn't clear if who's a founder, who's a volunteer, who's going to make a substantial contribution, who's not, et cetera, et cetera. Second,
the proverbial founding team of Ethereum.
Yeah, it's huge, right? Everybody's a founder. And so that was the first dimension that was a bit problematic. Second, there was enormous amounts of space between people. And also different cultures and languages between people. There was a core Ethereum team in Switzerland. There was a core Ethereum team in Toronto. And there was people all over the world, including a China core that had formed. And so as a consequence, these teams didn't communicate with each other or share the same values or philosophy with each other. Okay, so when you look at these things, you say, all right, well, at some point you're going to have a bit of a schism. And the schism revolved around what is the best execution vehicle to actually bring Ethereum to market. So my argument was it's probably better to found a company like Consensus before you found the Ethereum Foundation. Because what you're doing is you're using smart money and you're basically building a product from start to completion before you actually create a mass distribution event. And you have quite a bit of time to reflect upon stable, proper governance, meaning that when you form the Ethereum Foundation, you've already done a lot of due diligence and thought about who's going to sit there, and you've proven who are good actors and bad actors and who has merit, who doesn't have merit. Everything was kind of like backwards. And my argument was that if we did everything backwards, first, most of the brains would leave because they didn't have financial incentives to stay. I was right. 7 of the 8 founders are gone. Second, that we probably would not have wise fiscal discipline on the ICO money. And I was also right there. Half of it was lost to market volatility, and they spent, I think, $8.5 million of the remaining money, and only had 500,000 left in treasury when they launched Ethereum. On the other hand, a lawyer friend of mine who helped design Ethereum in Switzerland had the best statement ever. It went to $1 billion. It's just like Bitcoin. So no one really cares, right? It became a tremendously successful project, and it's built its own adherence and its own culture, and it led to the ICO revolution and now the DeFi revolution. So you can kind of Monday morning quarterback it and say, well, what if we had done things differently and went for profit instead of not for profit? Would we look more like Ripple? Would we have failed? Would we have succeeded? Who knows? Would have the regulatory side been different? Who knows? And I don't really care to speculate because it's kind of pointless. Outside of the fact that there are a lot of lessons about governance that have been learned, everything from the DAO incident to perhaps it's better to have tighter controls on your founding set that people are now incorporating into their personal projects. And also, I think it was a tremendously positive event for the ecosystem because there's Consensus and Parity Tech and all these other companies now floating around, and these companies are doing very good work. They're doing great scientific research, they're writing good software, and they're launching tons of different philosophies and ideas. And I have no idea who's going to win, but I know someone's going to win, and whoever of that group wins is going to produce a lot of value for the world. So it's like all things. You get some good, you get some bad. It's like PayPal could have been the world's largest financial institution. It ended up being an asset of eBay and kind of a has-been, but it led to the rise of SpaceX and Tesla and to 100 other great companies because the founding set went on and did great things. And perhaps that's the route Ethereum will take. Perhaps it'll still be the market standard. We don't know.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy because I also view it, at least as an investor, as one of those situations where if you knew too much, you would have missed out on the rally. So there is a certain kernel of truth when you say that folks that invested and made a ton of money in the Ethereum crowd sale were inordinately lucky, because I was full-time in the industry in 2013, 2014, 2015. Right. And you knew some of the actors and some of the infighting and some of the chaos that led up between the pre-sale to the initial mainnet launch. And you would look around and you'd say, how can you possibly invest in this thing, right? All the founders are leaving. There's all this drama. So first of all, I don't think it's a story that's well known yet, but to your point, there are some books that are in the works for this year. And I think, they're going to be, at least bestsellers within the crypto industry. We won't dwell on that. We'll let the storytellers tell that full story in its entirety with all the various characters. But I do think that sets the stage for kind of what comes next, right? So you exit the Ethereum project, and this is where I interjected. This is now late 2015, correct?
No, 2014. I left in June of 2014.
Late 24. Okay.
Yeah,
okay,
right before the crowd sale.
Okay, so let's talk about the next phase for you. You mentioned, okay, I was 0 for 2. That's arguable. Maybe you were feeling that way at the time.
Right.
But what comes next for you at the time, feeling like you're 0 for 2?
Well, yeah, I was 0 for 2 because I elected not to receive my Ether, and I never received any BitShares. So I was entitled to 293,000 Ether. I didn't take it. Had that, I sold it at the market top. I think that was $350 million. So, it's 0 for 2 is pretty accurate in that respect. But on the other hand, you're right, I learned a lot and I gained a lot of experience and knowledge. So I said, if I'm going to do this again and do a third company, then I want to build something that philosophically is 100% aligned with how I think. And I'm a very rigorous guy. I like basic science. I like peer-reviewed research. I like evidence-based software. So I said, all right, well, whatever I do, I want to create a factory that builds stuff with that philosophy. So a project came along where some guys wanted to do an Ethereum of Japan. And I said, okay, well, that sounds really interesting. If you guys let me basically have control over the roadmap and how the software is built and the science that goes into it, I'll do it. And I had this unused roadmap from when I was the CEO of Ethereum about how the software should be done and how I figured DeFi should be done and how smart contracts should be done. So basically, I had the total freedom to pursue that. And so I structured it just like a DARPA project. And basically, we went and hired a bunch of scientists. We got a bunch of university relationships in 2015 and 2016. And we did just 2 years of peer research. And it was the most fun 2 years I've ever had in my life. We were looking at projects like Scorex, which was an experimental framework for building blockchains. We wrote the first Ouroboros paper. We updated the GKL model for like a foundation of blockchain. And nobody knew who the hell we were. No one talked about us. It was like I was dead from 2015 to 2017. Meanwhile, we went from 2 people as a company, myself and a co-founder, to over 100 people. And we just started building stuff up. And then suddenly we launched Cardano in September of 2017. And everybody says, oh, Charles Hoskinson's still alive. There's actually something here. And unfortunately, we launched in a boom cycle. So unrealistic expectations got hold of the ecosystem and we went to the moon. Which was just a really miserable experience because, I all that year had been saying that ICOs were a ticking time bomb and that the market was being irrational. And I knew that we'd probably be into some hard times. So we just wrote it out and we just kept building. And over the last 2.5 years since we released the Byron release, we've kind of constructed a technological marvel. Cardano is the first product built on formal methods in our space. So we wrote rigorous mathematical specifications. The company's written over 58 papers. We're almost at 60. These papers are peer-reviewed at major conferences like CCS and NDSS and Crypto and Eurocrypt, which are really hard conferences to get into. Like 10% of the papers submitted are accepted amongst domain experts. So not cryptocurrency people, but cryptographers from Harvard and Cornell and places like that. So it's from one angle, it's been wildly successful because I got to do what I wanted to do. And we really pushed the science of the cryptocurrency space forward. From another angle, it's been brutal because all the software, the way we're writing it, is kind of amenable to like a waterfall process, and and it's not really meant for agile, fast-moving industries. So to figure out how to write software in that envelope and modify things that are written by academics to things that are written by Silicon Valley people has been just miserable. It's been the hardest work of my life. As with all things, you take the good and the bad, but it's just fun to run my own company, and it's fun to run my own roadmap. And we have a great community now. It's over 1 million people floating around Cardano's ecosystem across the globe, and it's always draws a crowd. So as with all things, you start somewhere, you have some failures, and then eventually get to a place where you get to do what you love and like, and that's what IOHK is basically as a company. And now we've built a lot of abstract capabilities for software, so it's very easy for us to build permission projects. It's very easy for us to build other cryptocurrencies. We do a lot of contracting throughout Africa. We have an office in Ethiopia. We do contracting in East Europe, like Georgia. I get to meet heads of state pretty regularly, and I was just in Davos and had dinner with the Prime Minister of Georgia, little things like that, and it's just been a surreal, wild experience. And, we even meet musicians. Like I met the former drummer of Guns N' Roses at a dinner. I was just like, what is going on here? This is crazy. I never expected to live this type of life. So it's been a pretty wild ride since 2013. 7 years of just travel, peer work, 52 countries I've been to, and just so much work that we've done.
And where are you now? I mean, so there's 5 phases, or at least last I checked. I'm not sure if there's been updates to this, but 5 phases for the ultimate rollout of Cardano. The first, IOHK has had a pretty heavy hand and impact in making sure that the network launches and you get through the first couple of phases. But right now, I believe you're in phase 2 with Shelley, where you're gradually working on a transition to proof of stake. And can you just talk about the where the network is now and how you view the speed at which you're upgrading the network and fostering innovation in this network, given some of those limitations that you have with the more rigorous academic mindset versus the faster and looser Silicon Valley mindset, which isn't I think there's some intuitive trade-offs that teams need to make, whether they want to admit it or not. But at least you're acknowledging one of your trade-offs is speed for rigor. Well,
and ideally, if you have better processes and original research, then you can move the trade-off profile a little bit. So you can have your cake and eat it too, meaning that you can still use formal methods, but you still get a bit of agility. We even wrote a paper on it. So let's talk about the eras of Cardano. So when I thought about the project, I kind of broke it down into a collection of logical groupings. And so the first release we called Byron. And that was like, let's release something like Ripple, where it runs in a federated mode, but it is decentralized, meaning that anybody can access it, download the wallet, and transact on it. But the consensus nodes are run by a collection of federated actors. And really the point there was to introduce the project to the world and learn a lot of stuff about how to actually run a cryptocurrency, help desk function, exchange support, getting all the APIs right, third-party wallet integration, building a community, getting liquidity for the token, all of these things that you just kind of need to do to get a cryptocurrency where it is. And, for Bitcoin, it took 5 years for that to actually get to a reasonable point. So we called that the Byron release. And really that was just, hey, we're all going to learn and we're going to make a lot of mistakes and it's going to be painful. So just hold on. Then after you've gotten your feet wet, you've got your wheels spinning, then we have to start turning on decentralization and hand the network governance, the network consensus over to basically the community. We call that the Shelley release. And we are imminently close to that. The first step in the Shelley release was getting the entire foundations built correctly. So we actually switched from just Haskell code to Haskell code based upon very rigorous formal specifications. Because once you decentralize the system, it's significantly harder to upgrade it. So you no longer have the luxury of making arbitrary changes and say, hey, let's do this or let's do that. Now you actually have to follow like some form of an improvement proposal process. So we felt it was really important that we get the soul of the product right, meaning that we have rigorous specs for it, then actually implement that. And we also needed to stabilize the consensus protocols because at Ouroboros, we've written like almost a dozen papers about it. And each paper kind of changes the protocol a little bit or adds new sexy features and functionality to make it more on par with the the security properties and utility of proof of work. So we had to wait a bit for the consensus protocol to stabilize and for the formal specs to be written. Then we had to think really carefully about delegation and the incentives behind it. We got to a point where we're like, shit, we need to hire a game theory guy. So we went to Oxford and we hired Elias Kasoupas, and it's a really great algorithmic game theorist. And we had to write some papers there too and kind of figure out what the incentives model should be. And that was really hard. So it took about 2 years to get to a point where we finally had enough knowledge and we had done enough where we started saying, okay, let's actually start testing these things. And so we released a Rust incentivized testnet last year, and we used that to saturate up the stake pools. We have almost 1,000 now that are floating around. And we built a very large community around it, and we got a lot of business and technical requirements for the business of staking and for what people would actually do in practice. So we've been collating all those, consolidating all of those into the final release. And now we're actually on a 2-week release cycle for our software. So we did achieve agility. We have very fast sprints. Software is being written very rapidly. And we're extremely close to now upgrading the mainnet from Byron to the Shelley era, in which case we can roll over all those stake pools that have saturated on the ITN and hopefully have one of the most decentralized cryptocurrencies at launch, and with a beautiful staking experience, things like cold staking. We also completely redesigned the way that exchanges list ADA. We abstracted out the wallet layer and the Explorer and to a project called Adrestia. And we've been actually co-locating developers with exchanges and writing libraries and other things with them, just so that it's easier to list data and to do staking as a service and so forth. So there's just a lot of good software engineering that the last 6 months we've been able to put in. And by the way, we're still using formal methods, so property-based testing and so forth.
When you say we, are you talking about IOHK, the Cardano Foundation, or the Cardano community?
IOHK primarily for the software side. The foundation has been doing some very pivotal stuff. So we kind of have a tripartite structure. There's the foundation, Emergo, and IOHK. With all cryptocurrencies, you have something called the ODCC model. You have operations, delivery, commercialization, and capitalization. So the ICO or whatever lives on capitalization. Commercialization is like what Consensus does. What we do is delivery. So we build the product, and then operations is the ongoing stuff like community management, exchange listings, help desk, these types of things. So when people are actually using the currency or the platform, they get the help and support that they need. So the foundation primarily does with operations. Mergo deals with commercialization, and then we deal with delivery. So we are the ones actually right now doing the technical side of the exchanges, but the foundation is actually the one that deals with the business and commercial relationship with exchanges. You know, for example, if they want to give a giveaway or pay a listing fee or whatever it is, they take care of that, and we just handle the technical questions. But it's tremendously complicated actually getting listed, because you end up having a very fragmented ecosystem. There aren't good standards that have emerged, so we end up having to deal with more than 30 exchange partners, and all of them have different configurations, and all of them have different philosophies and communication standards, and some are super professional and super secure, and other ones we're dealing with outsourced people in China as their listing people. You just wonder, like, you seriously trust external actors with $300-400 million in assets? I don't think I'm going to put my money on this exchange. So it's a wide spectrum, and we sit in the middle of all that, trying to orchestrate the tech side and make sure that it works well for them. And we've almost achieved that actually with Shelley. We're very proud of that. And that wallet backend is really a remarkable piece of software. And what I'm most proud of is over the last year, we've really learned how to write software quickly. We kind of get accused of delays and being slow, and they call us Cardano. But the reality is that we're predictably able to hit our milestones now, and we're on a 2-week release cycle, just like any agile sprint would be. And we're doing an enormous amount of parallel work. As I mentioned, there was Byron and Shelley, but there's also Gauguin, Basho, and Voltaire. Gauguin is about smart contracts, Basho is about scalability, and Voltaire is about governance. All three of those are not being done sequentially. They're actually being done in parallel. And we have parallel teams assigned to each of them. And there's a very strong possibility that Gauguin is going to hit roughly in the same quarter range as Shelley hits, because that team has been working for 3 years in parallel, building programming languages and new accounting models and designing new execution units and tooling and so forth. And we have a team working on Basho. A paper's coming out at the end of this month about it, Ouroboros Hydra. And we also have a team working on Voltaire. And we've done 3 years of research out of Lancaster on governance and software updates and voting, and built 3 prototypes. So there's a big payoff at the end of the tail for the way that we've chosen to do things. And I didn't really worry too much about being the first mover, because I realized whoever the first mover was just going to get hammered with all of the mistakes, just like MySpace did with social networks. They said, hey, we're going to have hack and scalability problems and poor development experience, and everybody's just going to be looking for the next thing to get off of the platform. So I figured it'd be good to let somebody else take all the arrows, and then after they lose some momentum, for us to appear with a much better, more holistic, commercially critical solution that gets serious actors very excited about the space.
I want to talk more about that, right? How do you ultimately attract developers and build an ecosystem around this protocol? Because Ethereum has a clear lead. Some of the other interoperable blockchains like Cosmos and Polkadot, even though it's pre-launch, certainly have as much or more buzz than some of the other live smart contract platforms. Tezos, same thing. It seems like it's Ethereum and everybody else. So that's going to be a pretty big challenge. We're going to get to that. I want to spend a decent amount of time on that.
Sure.
But before we do, I've had very few conversations like this with folks that have built top crypto asset protocols and tokens, where they've been able to very clearly communicate exactly what the listing process was like, to engage with all of these different stakeholders and exchanges. And I find often that's driven by 2 things. One, fear from a regulatory standpoint. How much should we be disclosing about our role in this? If the goal is ultimately to be decentralized, we don't want to be perceived as if we're centralized because we have any type of coordinated mechanism to actually support these exchanges. Right. And then the other element is fear that I better shut my mouth or we might get delisted. That doesn't necessarily apply to a project the size of Cardano and with the liquidity of the 88 token, because it's kind of like one of the must trades just by virtue of its size.
Right.
I think it'd be fascinating to learn a little bit more without naming names for the different exchanges, what the process has looked like in its most professionalized state, both from a technical and kind of compliance and information and communications onboarding. And then once you get to the long tail of exchanges, exactly what shortcuts you might expect other projects able to take advantage of as they ultimately get onboarded. So I don't know what color you can share, but I think it's a fascinating line to go into, at least while extracting with the names.
It's honestly a very frustrating mess because nothing is clear, nothing is standardized. Every geography has different priorities. At least some of the most egregious behavior, especially the things that we witnessed in 2017 and 2018, has kind of receded a bit, where certain exchanges would say, "Hey, we won't even talk to you unless you give us $5 million." My response to that was, "Go fuck yourself." So at least that egregious behavior has been mostly resolved, and there has been an effort to professionalize, and there has been an effort to try to create some notion of regulatory clarity. But just when you start getting comfortable with things, everything changes again. So this proof of stake revolution, especially staking as a service, it's not just us, it's Tezos and EOS and all these other guys. And exchanges are getting heavily involved in now potentially the operation of these networks. So they've gone from dispassionate, neutral vendors that are just providing a marketplace, to now, hey, we make profit from and have holdings in these ecosystems, and perhaps potentially have to actively trade against our customers. So it's a strange world, and it's one that nobody really has good answers for. From our side, though, what we think about is, how do we basically give you the highest performance, safest, best listing experience? Because that's all I can do as a technology company. I can't solve regulatory problems. I can't do this business stuff. There's other more qualified people than me. But what I can do is just make it the easiest thing in the world to list data. And then, of course, because we're a multi-asset ledger, then all the assets that we have on that ledger will be very easy to list as well. So our version of ERC20 will be easy to bring into the fray. And that's what we're right now focused on this year, is the best Explorer experience, the best wallet backend experience, and making it very easy to list. And then, the rest of these things, they tend to resolve themselves over time. There's real utility with what we're constructing. And actually, we have, I think, one of the best adoption plans of any cryptocurrency. And so when you look that there's real utility in use cases and real adoption, then you don't really worry too much about, well, is it a security or is it not a security or whatever, because it's self-evident that it's not. Second, we're going to be the most decentralized cryptocurrency by the end of the year, at least 100 times more so than Bitcoin and 50 times more so by EOS. The evidence for that is clear with the incentivized testnet. 1,000 stake pools registered, and a lot of them operating at good capacity. So there's overwhelming demand to decentralize the system. And so if you have a situation where you don't make centralized decisions, you have decentralized funding for the protocol development, there's a governance process that's democratic, and then the people controlling the ledger are all across the world in different jurisdictions, then that's truly real decentralized infrastructure. And meanwhile, the good research means that the system will get faster, or at least stay at the same performance with that decentralization trade-off. And we're able to converge the decisions with that decentralization trade-off, which is what we've been promising as an ecosystem for over 10 years, but no one's really delivered on because the research is just so damn hard and the code is so damn hard to write. So I think that's really the key, is just don't worry too much about these things because everything is ephemeral. Just focus on actually having a good relationship with your customers, building a really good product, and looking at the evolution of that product and making sure that the evolution is moving in the right direction. As long as decision-making continues to be more and more decentralized, as long as your system continues to get more and more decentralized, then you're on the right road, and I don't think anybody's going to have a major problem. And then, of course, act with integrity. Don't go and do profit-seeking things against retail investors. Don't go and screw people. I follow the Paul Helmuth method of development. He was a famous Hungarian mathematician, and he was a beautiful writer. And his key to writing was tell them what you're going to do it, and tell them what you did. And so similarly, you follow that with software development. We said we're going to do a deep R&D project structured like a DARPA project, high risk, high return, first principles. We have no commitments to anything. We're just going to write tons of papers and learn how to build a best-in-class cryptocurrency. So we went and did that. And then we said, we're going to go implement that cryptocurrency. And here are the 5 stages. 1 is about liquidity and just getting it into the ecosystem. 2 is about decentralization. 3 is about smart contracts. 4 is about scalability. And finally, you have governance. And these are the things that we have to pull together to have a 3rd generation cryptocurrency, to be able to actually have 1 billion users and be useful to those users. And then we told them who the target audience is going to be. We said, look, the people who care the most about this and need this infrastructure the most are not you and me. We're in the developed world. We have bank accounts. We have access to financial services. When we go to borrow money, we borrow it at a reasonable rate. Go to buy a home, you can buy a home. The people who care about this are people who live in places that have 35% interest rates, if they can get it, remittances that cost 15%. So we went and rolled it out in Africa. And we actually got great commercial relationships and government relationships from Ethiopia on down. And one deal can bring 5 million users into our system. And those users grow with the system. So we've always had that long arc. And as long as I think you have that clarity and that simplicity and that honesty and transparency, then it's not really that much of an issue. It's an issue if your end goal is, I want to sell a lot of tokens and walk away with the money, and I sold those tokens to retail investors. And those retail investors are mom and pops, and you sold them on a dream that they're going to get 100x tomorrow, and then they lose all their retirement. You walk away with $2 billion. If you do that, there is no legal scheme or regulatory scheme or structure you can construct that will protect you. Because at some point, the law will just change, or the regulator will just manipulate things in a way, go after you, and make your life miserable for the next 10 years. And if they don't, you'll get shot by one of your retail investors who feels defrauded. I mean, come on, you'll always be looking over your shoulder. So just don't be an asshole. Don't be a criminal. Build something that has real value, have a real philosophy, and stick to it like we have for 5 years now, on the same project, the same damn book, doing the same things, and deliver what you promised the market. Even if it's a little late, deliver the damn thing. And then everything else it just works its way out. That's what Bitcoin did. That's what Vitalik did with Ethereum. And that's what we're doing with Cardano. That's why I think we're going to win.
When I talk to you in person, both at live events, we talk about this being overdue, and now again today. Whenever I've had conversations one-on-one with you, you always come across as very convincing. I'm sure part of that is that eloquence is from just being a professor, right? You kind of learn how to communicate more cogently and convincingly. I'd argue if you're going to be a professional professor, right? What if any challenges have you had communicating amidst the noise and amidst the drama of crypto Twitter? Because I don't want to even call them controversies, because some of the Twitter wars and memes that have floated around take on a life of their own, and
Right.
and they're more soap opera than actual controversy. But it does impact the branding of different founders of different projects. What do you think you've done right? What do you think you would have done a little differently, given that you've been focused on this project for 5 years? And I'm sure you have publicly argued that people misunderstand Cardano or misunderstand you
Right.
and your team's motives. What do you attribute that to? And how, as you hit these next milestones, do you reset the narrative? Is it just through performance and shipping, or is there an element of the story that hasn't yet been told that needs to be better told?
I've met a lot of really interesting people in life, and I remember meeting David Bowie before he died, and he had this great quote, which was, "You can either read the book or you can write the book." And so the key about narratives is that people have the memory of a goldfish, and crypto Twitter says this or that, or the social media is in one direction or the other direction. And then the entire narrative can change at a turn of a page. A great example would be Steve Jobs in the early 90s. If you asked anybody in the tech media who's Steve Jobs, they'd say he's a has-been. He was a brilliant guy in the 80s, fired from his own company, and he's struggling with next computer. He never ships anything. He talks big, doesn't deliver. You ask them in 2007 who's Steve Jobs, greatest entrepreneur, innovator in the human history, the next Edison. Basically, he revolutionized everything, and the world will remember him. Why? Because it wasn't because he said anything, it's because he did stuff. The key to writing the narrative, winning the narrative, is just deliver, build things. Had Ethereum run out of money, and they're very close to it, $500,000 away, there had probably been regulatory problems, and the story would have been, a bunch of infighting founders raised 18 million, squandered it, and look at all their bad personal conduct. But because they shipped, Vitalik now has the Wikipedia page. He won the Thiel Fellowship, and he's considered to be one of the greatest entrepreneurs in our space, and probably will be one of the greatest entrepreneurs of the 21st century if he continues his velocity. So the key to the narrative is success, and that's exactly what we're doing at our company. We chose on purpose the hardest of paths. It would have been extremely easy for us to fork Ethereum like Tron did, build up a great marketing team, and deliver a piecemeal innovation and try to compete at that level. And I think people would have been perfectly happy in the short term with that, because the returns would have been great. But instead, what we did is we said, we want this technology to be in the hands of 1 billion people. So we have to think different. We have to look at the problem differently. We have to do foundational research. We have to do the hard stuff. We have to ask, what happens when you go from 1,000 to 10,000 to 100,000 to 1 million to 10 million to 100 million users and so forth, to your network stack? How do you need to write transactions so you can shard them? How do you handle smart contracts? Blah, blah, blah. There's 100 damn things to think about. And all of these things pull at each other, and there are no good answers, and no one wrote this book. It's new. So what we've done is we've done all this amazing foundational research, and our challenge as a company is that is utterly inaccessible. No one in the crypto space at this point, in this stage, if they're intellectually honest and they're just not a complete asshole or shill, would say that we haven't done great academic work. They'll say, yeah, we have. The problem is that you cannot take a 60-page paper and hand it to a regular everyday people, which has tons of math in it, and say, here you go, here's proof of stake. It's solved. They can't read it. They can't understand it. So where we've really failed is we haven't been very good at product marketing. There's no greater example of that than going to the proof of stake Wikipedia page. We're not mentioned. We solved proof of stake. We solved every major problem of it, and it's not just us saying that. we went to peer-reviewed independent conferences with double-blind submissions, and they accepted the papers saying there's merit legitimacy to the arguments and statements we've made. We've even begun formally verifying the proofs using Isabel, for heaven's sake. The bar was so high there, and we met that bar. The problem is that we never communicated that in a way that was understandable. So I think that's the first major issue. The second issue is there's a lot of bitterness, because ADA was at $1.20, Ethereum was at $1,000, and then everybody lost 90% of their value. And if a person bought at the top, there is no solace for them because they've lost 90% of their money. So you can tell them you've cured cancer, you can tell them you've saved Rwanda, you've cured coronavirus, and they're like, great, what the fuck does that have to do with the tea in China? You know, they just don't care. And so they have to have a reason why they've lost that money. And they have to say, well, it was because you made a mistake, or this project didn't execute fast enough, or this other project outcompeted you, yada, 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 whatever it might be. So until the markets recover, there's going to be a clique of people that are always fundamentally unhappy. The other thing is that we have financial incentives to be tribal in this space, and people just don't understand that. You know, a lot of the people that look at Cardano and they criticize Cardano, they're criticizing it because they're legitimately afraid that if we succeed, they fail. So they can't allow us to succeed, and vice versa. If you have a financial interest in something, you don't want the competitor of that thing to be dominating in the marketplace because it might hurt your bottom line. Or you might just believe that your thing is perfect, has never made a mistake, and your people are brilliant and amazing, and your cult has the true version of God, and everybody else is just like Satan incarnate. So there's tons of tribalism in this space, and people provoke controversy and tribalism, and there's money to be made in fractioning people and tribalism. And so there's tons of shock jocks and tons of people that go around, all they do is create controversy. Like Chico Crypto or all these other guys. All they do all day long is just, who can we throw some molten tar on and see if it sticks? And then, of course, I'll get a lot of views and I'm monetized, and basically this gets me hype. Tone Vase is another one. He's not doesn't have as much vitriol. He's a bit more of a parody at this point. Actually, Tone and I are pretty good friends, but he calls everybody a scam. You know, and so this is a whole industry that has formed in our place. And then you get provoked into things, and sometimes certain people just don't have the social graces or skills. Like the worst mistake I ever made on crypto Twitter was the MetaMask incident, the infamous "Do you know who I am?" tweet.
Which I alluded to in the intro.
And and if you look at it from my perspective, I was looking at it like a CEO. I had just launched a product, Icarus, which turned into Yoroi. Now 20% of the Cardano network is on it. It's a Chrome extension. And MetaMask had been delisted, and literally got delisted the day that we launched Icarus. And I'm thinking, oh God, is this now a Google crackdown? Did I just spend 6 months building something that I have no distribution with? And the MetaMask team's very small, and I didn't have anybody's email, and I'm desperately trying to get in contact with them to get the inside story. So I pinged these guys over Twitter, because I've pinged everybody over Twitter. I talked to so many people. I've even talked to Jack Dorsey over Twitter through PMs, and I couldn't send them a PM directly. So I just tweet them, say, hey, I need to talk to you guys. Can you send me a private message? And then they say, hey, just send something to the support email. And I'm thinking, it's a small open source project. They have a huge user base. If I send it to the support email, I'm going to get a reply in 3 weeks or 4 weeks. This is just how this world works. And guys, I'm the CEO of a big company in this space. Come on, you would give Vitalik, Joe Lubin, Dan Lambert, you give anybody, a PM. That's just let's be reasonable about this. Come on. And I say that, because I was in Vietnam at the time I sent that tweet. I actually had the flu. I wasn't feeling very good. I'd been traveling a bit, and I was just pissed off by that. I was like, this has nothing to do with you just routing support email. You know exactly who I am. And because you're on the Ethereum side and I'm on the Cardano side, you're just dissing me over Twitter. And you're hurting yourself. Come on. And if I was your boss, I would be like, this is ridiculous. If I was the CEO of Ford and contacting somebody from GM, do you think they'd tell the CEO, oh, no, use the support email? Come on. This is ridiculous. This has nothing to do with ego. It has to do with professionalism or rapport. So I send that tweet, and then immediately it blows up to this. Charles Hoskinson is the guy who yells at people at the check-in desk at the hotel. And when the waiter doesn't show up fast enough, is the dick with the waiter. And it's just my whole character became an entire tweet. because and everybody dogpiled. They made T-shirts about it. They still talk about it today at conferences as if this is the man. Meanwhile, they never thought about the commercial reality. They never thought about the context of this. They never thought about the fact that 140 characters don't define a person, and they never even looked at it from another perspective other than the words themselves. And so this is the problem with social media, is people want simple answers to complicated situations. People want to compress an entire human being to a certain statement, and then then they use confirmation bias to double down on that, and then it gets so bizarre it becomes a parody of itself. Where have I ever been the arrogant asshole in this entire space? We have examples of that. Look at Craig Wright. He shows up in Rwanda. I was there. And he said, I have more money than your country. That's how he opened his speech. I spent 10 minutes in the backstage with him, the most thoroughly despicable 10 minutes, where he wouldn't even give us the time of day. He was looking at his cell phone the entire time while we were talking to each other, and he would only look up to yell at us. And then he just bragged about how big his patent portfolio is and how we're all criminals and he's the only guy who's the harbinger of truth. Those are the people in the space that are arrogant assholes. What have we done? Everything we do is open source. We write papers with anybody who wants to write papers with us. We've never written a patent in the entire history of the company. All of our code is open source. We've brought up tons of entrepreneurs in this space. For example, Alex Chirpinoy with Scorex, which led to the Waves project and a litany of other things. We spent $1.5 million building up Ethereum Classic, and we released everything for free to that ecosystem. We make no money on that. You can just look at the track record of the last 5 years of the contributions we've made, even in the Ethereum space where they brutally criticize us. We went ahead and financed the KEVM semantics, the first set of formal semantics for Ethereum. At one time, we had a fully working Ethereum node, full client. Mantis worked with both Ethereum Classic and Ethereum. And we never asked for anything in return. We never told them how to do their job. I certainly criticized people like Tezos. Yeah, because there was just really bad stuff. They had to spend $60 million to clean up their bad stuff. And absolutely, they put a guy they couldn't control into the foundation. He didn't share the vision of the founders, and they built themselves in an 8.5% guaranteed return on retail investor money. So of course I'm going to criticize them. EOS, of course I'm going to criticize them for raising $4 billion and saying they have no fiduciary obligation to their investors and having a very haphazard launch and a litany of problems that are still not resolved to today. Yes, that's commercial criticism, and that's conduct criticism. It's fact-based, it's based on things that people did, and it's based on things that hurt not rich people, but poor people. So I'm going to have a difference of opinion, and I'm going to have, when I see these things, point them out. On the other hand, if Tezos came to us today and said, we'd like to co-author a governance paper with you guys, we'd say, sure, as long as it's released under an open source license, absolutely. If the EOS guys came to us today and said, we'd love IOHK to build a DSL, we'd say, sure, as long as it's released under an open source license and it has real benefit, we'll go do that for you guys. And we're happy to work with anybody, whether on Ethereum or anything else. There's never ego or any of these things in our commercial relationships. But if you go to crypto Twitter, you'd assume that we're just these super narcissistic, hyper partisan, everybody else must die, and it's a big cult of personality around Charles Hoskinson. Meanwhile, if you watch my presentations, what do I say? Kill the founders. Trust the process over the people. Don't trust us, trust the science. Use the peer review process. Create common source of truth with formal methods that's implementation agnostic, so you can have a diversity of implementations by independent teams. Decentralized decision making, decentralized funding with treasury mechanisms. These are not the goals and aspirations of a cult of personality or somebody who thinks they have the right to control everything or control you. These are the aspirations of a person that wants to let the ecosystem go and be Darwinian in control of the users, not one company. But crypto Twitter just doesn't seem to get that. They just want to compress people to a little thing. But here's the thing: I have a great life. So to quote Herman Cain's mother, I does not care. I have a farm. I have donkeys. I have chickens. I have geese. I have great parents. My brother's a doctor. I talk to him all the time. Life is good for me. So it's not real life. That's just shallowness, and that's just the id of the internet and passing thoughts. And if you let it bother you, it's never going to be fair. You're never going to be win. You're going to be like on the rapids, basically at the mercy of the river. Or what you can do is just ignore the whole damn thing, build stuff, and control the narrative, as I mentioned. And then over time, people will actually converge to the right opinions, and they'll see what you've done and what you've contributed. And that's what's happening, as reflected in the adoption of ADA and as reflected by the interest we've got in the ecosystem.
There is an interesting middle ground, right? So everything that you just said, I'll let your criticisms, stand on their own 2 feet. And I certainly have my own for various projects or actors within the ecosystem, and I'm pretty public about them. But the middle ground may be your story checks out. I can totally envision being in that scenario with MetaMask, sending that tweets, and then watching everything kind of blow up. I think I've had tweets like that. I think most people have. There's on one aspect, you can kind of ignore it. The other aspect, you can kind of laugh it off, embrace it, and then say, whatever, I'm going back to work. But what's interesting, because we are in different tribes within crypto, is that those memes start out as harmless schadenfreude, right?
Right.
And then I've kind of watched this play out over and over again, not just with you, but with, Vitalik's a scammer because he sold, quantum computers when he was 18 or whatever. Basically you go down the list of like top 100, crypto asset creators, and every single one of them, the things that have been said are just, would make most people